Here's a critter, a creature, a human being, if you will, who can be hurt. And it's wrong to cause them this pain and suffering unless there's some reason for it. And one reason to cause someone pain and suffering has to do with brought it on themselves and they deserve it. Punishment. Another reason to cause pain and suffering to a human being may be because it's a way of achieving a greater good. For example, going to the dentist typically hurts. Those of you who have families who are dentists, my apologies. I know there's painless dentistry, but it's a nice example. Dentistry hurts. But there's a compensating, overwhelming benefit. So what rights are saying is you shouldn't harm people, shouldn't hurt people, unless there's a reason. And the reason can either be a justice-based reason or it can be a utility-based reason. And occasionally utilitarianism says sacrifice an individual for the greater good. Okay? Rights say humans are really important. It really matters. It matters what happens to them. And rights are just a way of saying leave people alone. The best way to think about rights is if you're into like science fiction, they're kind of like a force field around you. And what they do is they protect you from being used by others. So what's going on with rights has to do with the notion of autonomy. Autonomy is the notion that it's your life and you get to make decisions about what to do with it. Now, I don't know of any right which is absolute. All rights are limited by the rights of everyone else. The best way of putting this point that I've ever heard was a professor of mine when I was in grad school, and he didn't come up with it. It's a classic. My rights end where your nose begins. I have a right to do anything I want so long as I don't interfere with you doing anything you want. And so it's this nice little self-balancing act. Rights basically make sure everyone leaves everyone else alone. Suppose I have some great, grand, glorious project, but I'm going to need to use people to accomplish this great, grand, and glorious project. I can use people if they give me their permission to use them. But I can't just go out and say, okay, this person here, I'm going to make her go build me a pyramid. For whatever reasons I want pyramids. Why? Because to do so would be to violate her rights. Now, am I actually doing anything in the physical that's violating a right? Well, no, there's no rights to violate. It's a way of saying I have morally erred because I have interfered with her living her own life. That's what rights are. It's a way of saying you shouldn't interfere with people when they're living their own life in such a way that they're not interfering with anyone else living their own lives. This is the whole notion of autonomy. Self-rule. That's what autonomy actually means, self-rule. I make my decisions about my own life. Now, tell me this. I'm going to actually shut up, believe it or not. Now we're going to start the discussion, because I've actually laid out my theories here. Why does it matter why do rights matter? Why are rights important? What's life like if you don't have rights? So here's how I do discussions when I guest lecture, since I don't know who any of you people are. I'm not going to learn names in 45 minutes. I'm going to do something very rude. I'm going to point, which my mother said never do. I'm going to point, and I'm going to say you, and then you, and you, and we're going to go down the row. If any of you, and I assume in this class it's small enough you know each other, you're comfortable, but if you don't want to talk, you have no obligations to talk. Just kind of go, nah. I'll leave you alone. I won't come back and harass you or anything. So you have a pass option. Okay?
You have some autonomy.
You have autonomy. You have some rights, okay? Also, the other thing you should know is I am a philosopher. And I use the Socratic method of teaching. And if you're not familiar with the Socratic method of teaching, brace yourself. It is probably the most obnoxious form of learning ever invented.
Now don't you feel comfortable?
Everybody's like, oh my God. Socrates ran around asking people questions. And no matter what answer they gave, he went, really? You think so? Well, what about this? And showed them that their answer was bad. And he just kept demoralizing people. He did this for many, many years. They finally got fed up, and they killed him. They poisoned him. All I'm asking is you just say pass. Okay? Give me some, So, first person, whose name I don't know, Krista. I've now talked about rights, utility, and justice. So I want you to tell me about rights. Why is it that rights are important?
So that people can live happy lives.
So? Why should people get to live happy lives? No one promised you get to live a happy life, did they? What's the consequence? I don't know what consequence. Why do you think you get to live a happy life?
It's not that I get to, it's that...
You should get to.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, everybody should get to.
Why? I have the easy job. Why?
If it was a greater question, I don't know why, really. Maybe everybody's here learning for a purpose,
Really?
Yeah.
What purpose?
Maybe whatever comes beyond life.
What if there's nothing? Then it's all a joke? Then we're wasting our time. Second person, do you agree we're wasting our time unless there's life after death?
Yeah, I do.
Really? Third person, what do you think?
No, I think that everything is a learning opportunity.
For what purpose?
Something in the future, I don't know.
What if when you die there's no future?
What'd you say?
What if when you die there's no future? What if when you die you're rot? End of story.
But there's God's future.
If there's a God.
Yeah, if you believe in that.
Yeah. I don't. Let's pass that off. Let's do not do religion. I'm a philosopher. This is what you get with philosophers. Do I actually believe in God? I'm not going to answer that question.
Yeah.
For the purpose of this argument, no. When you die, you're rot. Let's assume that. Let's go back to the first person. When you die, you're rot. So what are you doing now? What's the purpose of this? If there's a God, all the questions are answered. Go home. It's okay. Taken care of. Don't worry about it. As soon as there's not a God, now what?
Well, then we're just trying to make each other happy while we're here.
Why?
Basically. To make us feel better, I guess.
Does it matter if we feel good?
Not in the long run, but for short term purposes, maybe.
As far as I know, that's the right answer to the meaning of life. This is philosophy.
Say it again.
As far as I know, from having spent 20 years studying this, having many nights of insomnia worrying about it, is there a God? I don't know. And if there's a God, have we got what he wants us to do correct? I have no idea. Assuming for the moment, however, for the sake of argument, no God. When you die, you're rot. And let's face it, even if there are people who love you now, who care about you, eventually they're going to die and rot. Eventually you will be utterly forgotten. So, from the big picture, whenever my students are misbehaving in class and they're just being obnoxious, I give them this lecture just to depress them. From the big picture, as far as I can tell, none of it matters. It's a fluke that we're here, and eventually we won't be. End of story. But I'm still here right now. You hear the Texan come out on that one? I'm here now. So, is there some grand scheme? I don't know. But I do know that I care now what happens. Ought I to care? I don't even know how to answer that question. All I know is I hurt, I get upset, I feel happy, and guess what? I prefer the happy. End of story. So, why are rights important? Well, how about this? Because what you're doing right now, the life you're living right now, this may be it. There's no payoff. There's no cosmic justice meter going, okay, she had 3 crappy days, we'll give her a good one. This is it. It's not, you make all sorts of sacrifices and when you die you get a better place in heaven. This is it. What you're living right now is the only life you will ever live. And once 1 second of it is gone, you never get it back. So, why are rights important? Because it's the only way to protect the only thing you're ever going to have. So, that's my meaning of the life lecture. Why are rights important? Because rights say, if you interfere with me, if you use me for your goals, even if your goal is to improve humanity, if it requires my death to improve humanity, or it requires my diminishment of those things which make life worth living, and I'm supposed to sacrifice for the greater good, when am I compensated? And the answer is, unless there's an afterlife, you're not. Since I'm not sure there's an afterlife, I refuse to be used for the greater good. What do rights do? They protect you so that you can live your life, because it may be all you will ever have. And that's pretty important. So that's why rights are important. Why is utility important? Utility is important because it's promoting the good. What makes life worth living? So more of that's got to be better than less of that. But then what do you do when there's a conflict between the only way to achieve more of what makes life worth living for more people requires that we sacrifice an individual? And this happens all the time. It's called the draft. Right? It's also, from the readings Virginia gave me, it's called marriage. That's okay, dear. I'll stay up and do the dishes. You need your sleep so our children can have their college education. Reading what Virginia gave me turned me into a rabid feminist.
I'm going to ask another question.
Sure.
But sometimes, based on whatever beliefs people have, they get some sense of pleasure or satisfaction out of doing things for other people, even though it might bring some temporary discomfort for them.
Ah. There's another moral theory that I didn't put up. We can talk about. Egoism. Egoism is a theory which says that the right thing to do, the moral thing to do, is what you want to do. Doesn't matter what it is. That it takes my argument about the meaning of life and rights to the extreme. This is the only life I'm ever going to live. And the best way to show respect for the sacredness of the individual is to simply say, do whatever makes you happy. And there's actually a moral theory that says that. If you've ever read the works of Ayn Rand, Atlas Shrugged, The Fountainhead, this is a theory Ayn Rand's promoting. I think this is a hefty little theory. But basically what it's saying is no one should ever do anything for anyone else unless they want to. Egoism as an ethical theory has a counterpart. Called psychological egoism. Psychological egoism says, as a matter of fact, human psychology is such that we can never do anything except what we want to do. That if you do something, you're doing it because you want to do it. What would it even mean to do something you don't want to do? You say, oh, I do lots of things I don't want to do. Well, then why do you do them? Well, because if I didn't, it would just get worse. Well, yeah, and what you want to do is to avoid it getting worse. You more want to avoid it getting worse than you want to avoid doing it right now, so you're doing what you want. The extreme of this, almost the absurd version of this, is Mother Teresa. If ever there was a selfless person, it's Mother Teresa. Well, it was Mother Teresa. But psychological egoism says no. She was doing exactly what she wanted to do. This is what made her happy. If, in fact, she were psychologically constituted such that she could stay home and watch soap operas and eat bonbons, that's what she would have done. But for whatever reason, she was not happy with a life of leisure. It was her life of service to others that made her happy. So she's doing what she wants to do. That's psychological egoism. It gets tied in with ethical egoism, namely, you have the moral obligation to do only that which you want to do. That's egoism. I didn't even put it over here with moral principles because it's actually a very flawed theory, but it is a theory you hear a lot. What's wrong with egoism is that egoism thinks that because you only do something if you want to do it, which I think is actually true, that means we're all selfish and we're all egoist. The difference, however, is what is it you want to do? That's what determines whether or not you're acting for others or acting for yourself. Here's a famous story about this. Abraham Lincoln was riding in a carriage, and they went across some draw or gully that was full of mud and recently rained, kind of just this yucky mire. And there was a mother sow, and she had 5 piglets. And the little piglets had gotten stuck in the mud and were drowning. And the mother pig was, screaming and making pig sounds or whatever. And the little piglets were drowning. And Lincoln said, stop the carriage. He was on his way to give the Gettysburg Address. I made that up. I don't know. But it was going to a very important thing. And he was in, fine clothes, etc. And he made the driver stop the carriage. They got out, and together they waded through the mud, and they rescued all the little piglets. None of the piglets drowned. It has a happy ending. And the mother piglet was happy, and they go off. And the driver said to President Lincoln, that was such a selfless act. And Lincoln says, no, it wasn't. It was a very selfish act. And the driver said, what? And Lincoln said, if I hadn't rescued those pigs, I would have worried about him for years. Now, Lincoln was a great president. He's wrong. The mere fact he would have been worried about the piglets for years is evidence he's not a selfish person. So the mere fact you do something, and you do it because you want to do it, doesn't mean you're selfish. It's when the only thing you're caring about is what's going to benefit you in one certain way. That's what makes you selfish. Lincoln wanted to rescue the pigs. And it may be what drove him to rescue the pigs was that he was going to be bothered by this if he didn't. But a selfish person wouldn't have been bothered by the death of the pigs. It is a selfless person who is bothered. And the mere fact you act upon the fact that you're bothered by the suffering of humanity doesn't make you selfish. Did y'all get that point? I wasn't prepared to talk about that. Mother Teresa. She's doing what she most cares about, but the fact that she cares about other people keeps her from being considered an egoist, which is what Ayn Rand got hopelessly confused in her philosophy. Okay? Now let's take all this and yank it down into the family level. Okay? Assume, for the sake of argument, that people do what they want to do. So the question is, when you do something which is of a sacrificial nature for your family, self-sacrifice, not that you're throwing your children on bonfires, self-sacrifice. I give up, let's make up stories here. I spent 4 years in college, 9 years in graduate school. All I've ever wanted to do is be a philosophy professor. I fall madly in love. We have children. My husband really likes his job too. And I say, that's okay. I'll give up my career. I'll stay home and raise the children. Now, what about that situation? If in fact I'm doing it because I love family, husband and child, more than I love my career, is that the correct way of thinking about this? Or is it because I think that family is more important than career? Not just that I love one more than the other. I have this view that one's more important than the other, that there's greater value in service to family than in service to career. And then it depends on what you're doing in your career. If your career is just something that you actually don't think is important, but you make money and so you feel good about yourself, is that the same as a career doing research to, I don't know, find an AIDS vaccine? And how do you weigh all of this out? That I don't have an answer to.
Well, or another reason somebody might make a choice like that.
Yeah.
I'll feel like a better person. I'll feel like, I'm doing the right thing, or I'm living by these principles I believe, or these beliefs I have, or I'll sort of win some brownie points, to say it in a crass way.
Yeah.
That's back to this, isn't
Yeah,
it?
it is.
But people, oh gosh, people can do the same thing for so many different reasons that the reasons are extremely important.
And you can't even ask someone what the reasons are, because on this level, to have that kind of self-awareness, very few people have it. So you wouldn't even know why you're doing it.
But isn't that kind of important sometimes to ask yourself?
Yeah.
Am I doing this because of my ego, or am I doing this because I really care about somebody else's well-being, or am I doing this because of some other reason?
Yeah. But even if you stop and ask yourself, why did you, the chances of getting the correct answer from yourself are pretty minimal, I would think. It's very hard to be truthful with oneself. That's why you need really good friends who say, you're just being a selfish bitch. Well, that's what my friends keep saying to me.
Well, that's one. We talked on the phone before this about the theory, the critical science theory that we're using, and gosh, I just lost my thought.
Why you need to be able to go back and use
I know what I
principles?
was going to say. That is based on the idea that you can't possibly know all these things about yourself, and that you need to be in dialogue or
Right.
in community with other people who are going to be honest with you as best they can be,
Right.
with human limitations to that, to help you see your blind spots.
Because at least if you start going through this stuff and thinking about it in this way, finding principles, are you making a decision about rights, about utility, about justice? Is it egoism? Are you concerned about autonomy? You're going to get better at it. And when you have the feedback, that gives you more things to work with. And it's a process. It is a dialogue. It's not that, I know what I'm doing, plop, plop, plop. It's a way of getting better at things. So that it's the process you go through. Okay. We've talked about rights and utility now. Why are they important? Yeah. Again, it's very, very brief, but I think it may be enough for now. So let me ask a very broad question. Do you guys have any questions for me about this stuff before I start applying it to a direct case? Anything y'all want to talk about? Okay. One of the most important things, are you going to remember everything I've strung up on the board? Probably not. So let me give you what it is I want you to remember right now, the most important thing. Don't just learn what rights mean and learn how to apply them. Don't just learn what utility means and learn how to apply it. Don't just learn what justice means and learn how to apply it. Know why rights are important. Know why justice is important. Know why utility is important. Because if you know why we worry about this stuff, your chances of applying it correctly goes just right through the roof. If you just take this stuff passively, memorize the definition of rights, and I give you a problem case, you go, okay, well that looks like a rights-based situation. We're talking about rights, and you apply rights. Okay, so we need to respect rights, and so we've done it. If that's your approach, you missed it. Don't learn this passively. Understand it. Why are rights important? Because of the value of human life. Why is justice important? Because of the value of that which makes human life worth living. Why is justice important? Well, justice actually ties right back in with rights, so that you have an equal distribution of benefits and burdens. Because if one person's bearing more of the burdens, you're actually using them, which is a violation of their rights, to achieve this better social goal, which is utilitarianism. So the three all weave back into each other. And sometimes, almost always, sometimes, to achieve a utilitarian goal may require a violation of rights. To protect rights may require that you don't go after utilitarianism. And it's a constant juggling act. Which one always takes priority? It's not an answerable question at all.
You know, it seems to me that people who are religious and have religious principles for buying or for deciding things still have some struggles, because there are all kinds of religious principles that people use that end up, I mean, how do I want to say, people sometimes apply those in ways that are really harmful to other people. They interpret them.
Well, what I think people usually do with religious principles is they have all sorts of natural personal biases, and then they come in with a situation, and then they make a judgment, and then they read through the Bible till they find a passage that justifies them to do what they want. Is that what you're talking about?
Well, I'm just saying it seems like, I mean, there are groups of people who commit suicide for religious principles. The Crusades were for religious principles.
Right.
You know, there are all kinds of things that are justified by natural law and religious principles that we have to be really careful about that. And I'm not at all holding one group above another when I say that, but
Well,
it's still not easy to make sure you're getting it.
yeah. I think what's going on there is just as rights and utility often come in conflict. Did y'all see the Star Trek when Spock was lost and they all had to go hunt for him? Okay. This is the difference between teaching philosophy majors and teaching family science majors. Y'all probably aren't totally into Star Trek. My kids know Star Trek. They've got all the Klingon language memorized, I hope it. Let me find a different example then. Doesn't matter, I'll make something up. The draft. This is utilitarianism at its clearest, I think. Whenever you use one or two people in order to achieve a greater good, that's utilitarianism, because utilitarianism says greatest balance of that which makes life worth living versus that which diminishes the value of life. Balance, so positive and negative, cost-benefit analysis, taking everyone into consideration, considering everyone equally, and if it turns out that you're going to achieve this goal by sacrificing a small number, then according to utilitarianism, you sacrifice them. I mean, that's the theory. But of course, to sacrifice someone for a goal is to violate their rights, unless they volunteer, in which case it's a different issue. But let's assume they don't volunteer. So rights and utility they spend most of their time fighting with each other. And a lot of ethical theory is trying to resolve the tension between rights and utility. So if you're going to have a religious principle that perhaps violates the rights of some humans, then you're going to have a tension there. Or a religious principle which goes against utility, it's just something else to throw in the mix of these things all struggling against each other. How do you resolve the struggle? How do you resolve the tension of competing values? Now remember I told you one of the first things you want to do when trying to make a decision is to separate the facts from the values. And I said because, when you get a bunch of competing values, it's so messy. Let's get the facts separated and put them to one side, because you can usually get some sort of empirical answer and resolve that. But when you have competing values, what do you do? What if, just a mean trick to play on people,